Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone, and we're glad you can attend Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts webinar about social skills in ADHD adults. And we just want to all hope that everyone is staying safe and staying well right now. Just some housekeeping before we get started with the webinar. If you've listened to one of our webinars before, you know we offer attendees a certificate of attendance. When the webinar ends, a post-event survey, will pop up. It will list 3 questions about the quality of the webinar, followed by 3 questions titled, Required for Certificate. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, you should answer those 3 questions. If you don't want a certificate, well, then don't bother answering them. Now for the theme of today's webinar, Making and Keeping Friends as an ADHD Adult. We all know how challenging that is for those diagnosed with the condition. Many of us have had the experience of forgetting to stay in touch with friends regularly, only to have the friendship fade away. Or sometimes we say something out of impulsivity that might hurt a friend or that was misunderstood by them. Sometimes we don't pay attention to what a friend is saying and lose track of the conversation. That is unsettling, especially when a friend is telling us something very personal about her life. We seem rude and uncaring when that really isn't the case. We're very happy to have Caroline Maguire here today to provide us with a blueprint on how to prevent ADHD symptoms from getting in the way of friendship. She has been helping those with ADHD, children and adults, make friends and find acceptance in her book, Why Will No One Play With Me? She contributes to leading publications, print and online, and is a sought-after lecturer. Join Caroline on Facebook at #AskCoachCaroline. Now, you can ask questions of Caroline at any time during the webinar. We will try to get to as many of them as we can after her presentation. To download the presentation slides of this webinar, click the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources on the bottom left of your screen. If you do not see the Event Resources tab, you need to refresh the page. So now finally, let me turn it over to Caroline. Thanks for being here today, and I know we're all anxious to hear your thoughts about friendship while having an ADHD brain.
Thank you so much, Wayne. I'm so happy to be here, everyone. And I'm going to first say that I'm going to give a little framing for this webinar in terms of the context of the virtual relationships many of us are having these days due to the corona outbreak, as well as the fact that many ADHD adults are managing our jobs virtually and other relationships. So I definitely will give and pepper my presentation with some of those examples. I want to talk a little bit about the things that Wayne mentioned affect us in terms of our relationships and friendships and the challenges that we may have in keeping friends and in our workplace relationships. So I've picked out a few different topics that I think are very common in ADHD. Of course, there are many others, and I could talk about this literally all day, but I've picked out a few things like self-regulation, overtures to become friends, TMI and oversharing, telling a tight story and sort of monologuing, and some things about reading people's mood and energy and context that I think will help, especially in this current environment. The process to become friends. I mention this process to become friends not because I don't think that you're aware of the process, but because it's really important for us to think about what gets in our way. And one of the things that I notice in my ADHD clients, and as some of you may have known, I have a book that came out last fall, Why Will No One Play With Me? So I'm speaking all over the world. And I notice that one of the things we have to think about is, first that we meet someone, then when we think about what's similar and different and how we might like to interact with that person, and then usually you engage in small talk. Except for ADHD folks, the things that come in are TMI and oversharing, then telling a tight story, the concerns and rumination we might have over what we say, and that interrupting us. And then we're going to try to learn more about people, and we share information about ourselves. And then we also try to share common experiences with people. And then, something that was mentioned before, we would see the friend and bridge outside those shared experiences. And so there's a lot of executive function, the management system of the brain, organization, prioritization, and a lot of just self-regulation involved in that process. And so it can trip us up and get in the way of us progressing toward where we want to be. One of the things I want to first say is that, when we want to have more intimacy with someone, we want to continue our relationship, obviously we have to take action steps toward that. And one of the things I often notice with ADHD adults is that sometimes we have a story about those action steps. The story can be that it's too hard. The story can be that it will just happen over time. Sometimes we forget to connect. We're now in a time where, due to the coronavirus, a lot of us are trying to stay in place, and so we're having to connect virtually, which takes some effort. There's also the need to join in, right? So to join a book club, to join something after work, and to really participate with other people in order to have those shared experiences. All of that takes a lot of organization, and we sometimes have anxiety based on past experiences. One of the things I've found that works really well, especially when folks have anxiety, is to have a specific role or job. I've had many clients who were waiting tables, or they had a specific reason they need to reach out to people. And that helps with this proximity or shared experience. And we create this experience in order to mate with potential friends. But the problem often is that for us, we want to rush toward that intimacy. This slide is about the universe of friendship. And one of the things I've found universally is that we often don't think about the different levels or different types of relationships in our life. And this is part of what contributes to our oversharing. This is part of what contributes to maybe us not enjoying chit-chat and things as much, because, we want to rush toward that intimacy. But friendships are a progression. Relationships are a progression. And there are different ways in which our relationships function. And so one of the reasons I'm including this is because I think one of the things that will help with some of these issues is to literally think about the people in your orbit and think about your level of intimacy and your level of friendship with them, and to sort of calibrate what you do, what you share, and how you reach out based on those relationships. So, for instance, we're always trying to think about who our audience is. And we have to think, if someone is an acquaintance, there's someone we don't see that often, there's someone we would not necessarily know all of their background and information. If someone is a buddy, they're more of a person we see in a specific setting, like church or an organization. And then there are folks who are, really more of a friend. We get an intimate best friend type of person. We get a couple in our lives, and those are the people we share the most with and have the most intimacy with. So one of the things that I've found is that because we rush toward this intimacy and because we really like it, or we fear the rejection, to think about the people in your life, in your workplace, and to think about their different categories here can be incredibly helpful. A lot of times when we're turning to TMI or oversharing or how much do you share, how fast do you go kind of thing, a lot of people with ADHD will say to me that they're not sure. This can be a way to calibrate a little bit, right? How much you share depends on your level of intimacy and your relationship with that person. It's not necessarily longevity, it's more like the depth of the relationship. So it's something that I wanted to share as we go into this stage of looking at some of these ADHD challenges because I think it can be really helpful. I want everyone to have something really manageable to take away from this webinar and something that you can work on and something you can practice that's a little less overwhelming because this can be a little overwhelming. So one of the things I had set up here is this idea that you would pick one mission. So rather than trying to work on everything under the sun, to think about one mission. Is it your emotional state and triggers and managing self-regulation? It might be thinking about who your audience is or reading the mood or the context. It might be TMI. But the idea is that as you go forward after this webinar, you would practice not everything, but one thing. And it might be that you practice one aspect, and then as you move forward, you add to that. I have here something that's just a welcome mat and an exit sign. And the idea here is that how do you know when to do these things? Well, every time you enter a new space, a new conversation, you start a text. If it's virtual, you enter a call, or you're working virtually, you enter a Zoom call. To use that as sort of a signal to start being aware of whatever it is you pick that you're working on so that you can focus and really be aware of what's going on. If you are a ruminator or somebody who tends toward anxiety, I would say that maybe the thing you're working on is trying to manage that and remember that and not to beat up on yourself as you enter this. So the idea here is just instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm walking away from this webinar, there's so many things to work on, to think about this as, one mission, one thing to take away.
Caroline,
Yes.
I just wanted to interrupt. Several people have already asked, what is TMI? For people, could you explain what that means real quickly before you move on?
No, absolutely. Sorry, I thought I had. It's too much information. So it's this idea of oversharing. And it's something that ADD folks bring up a lot. I see it a lot in social media. I see it a lot in requests in terms of folks asking how to manage it. And I am going to get to it in a minute. And it is driven by self-regulation. So it's all a self-regulation thing. No, thank you, Wayne. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that I am including something here on managing impulsivity and triggers is that a lot of the challenges that underlie the things that get in our way with social actually kind of come back to self-regulation. I have this picture here of fight, flight, or freeze, meaning that when you become overwhelmed with your emotions, your brain actually, it's an ancient system. It floods with emotion, and people usually go into flight, where you run, fight, where you argue, or freeze, where you kind of freeze up. And that may be something that you're hearing and you're saying, oh, I resemble that remark. And I have a picture here of a saber-toothed tiger because it's actually part of this ancient system. The system in our brain was set up so that if you were a cave person and you were to, see a saber-toothed tiger, you would know to flee. But nowadays, what ends up happening is that when we are flooded with emotions, our brain still has that reaction, and it makes it harder for us to read social cues. It makes it harder for us to look at a situation and think about the people and the place and know what's going on. And it also is something that affects how we approach a situation. So one of the tips that I have for everyone today is to start to look at what are your triggers. A trigger is a big reaction to a people, a place, or a situation. What are the things that flood you with emotion? And to consider that when you're entering a situation or when you're even working from home right now virtually, all of us are wearing a lot of hats. And when you feel yourself beginning to have that kind of emotional reaction, to take steps to de-stress and bring that level of emotion back down. Because if we operate in a triggered state, what ends up happening is, as you know, we have a bigger reaction to things. We end up making choices we wish we hadn't made. We say things we wish we hadn't said. In terms of self-regulation, I could talk all day about this, but just a few things to think about. As you're entering a situation, to think about, are there triggers? Are there people? Are there situations? Are there things that are going to cause you to have less self-regulation? The other is to pay attention to your body signals. Our body has sort of tells or signals that give us an awareness that our activation level and our self-regulation, our flooding of emotions is happening. And a lot of the clients that I work with will talk about having sort of a self-regulation hangover, that they go into a situation, they're feeling very emotional, they're feeling very triggered, they're, evaluating maybe through that lens, and that they therefore say the wrong things or do something they wish they hadn't done. And then the next day they are full of regret, and it really colors their experience. So what I would love to suggest is, if this is something you're struggling with, so many of these social challenges go back to self-regulation. So the self-regulation piece may be the piece that you want to think about as taking on as your mission, because that can affect everything we do. The next thing to think about is, who is your audience? When you're entering a conference call, or you're, in the workplace, you have different people you're interfacing with, and everyone is sort of an audience. Many of the things we need to think about are who is this person, what information do they need, and how will things be received, sort of stepping into their shoes. And if you keep just that simple phrase, who is your audience, in mind, it can really help you, because a lot of times we forget who we're speaking to, and then we do overshare, or we do talk about something that we know is going to affect that person. Oversharing. Okay, we talked about before TMI, meaning too much information, and oversharing. And one of the things that I notice as a sort of trend, and something that comes up a lot, is when folks are oversharing and then it affects relationships. Harkening back, there are different types of relationships, and we want to share based on the level of intimacy that we're experiencing with the person. A good rule of thumb is to think about unrestricted opinions, vulnerable information. The more exposed you are, it would be a more intimate relationship versus someone who you have more distance from and sharing with them. Oversharing is something that's really hard for us, because, like I said, we do crave that intimacy. And I'm seeing that someone said it takes a lot of mental energy. It does. It takes a lot of mental energy to work on these things. And I think it's important, therefore, that we not try to flood ourselves with all the things we want to work on, or to be too self-critical, but to think about more, maybe it is active listening and holding back and filtering a little more that you're working on. But, it can't be everything. You can't work on everything, or, you'll be just so overwhelmed. And so when we are approaching folks, rather than oversharing, to think about it as filtering. what I have found anecdotally is the more you think about filtering and the more you think about, I'm entering this space or I'm getting on this call or I'm in this conversation, and therefore I want to think about my audience and I want to think about the fact that what I share with this person depends on my level of intimacy and my relationship with them, and that I'm going to save the raw emotional information for people who I'm more intimate with, that just that attention that you're putting on the idea of filtering will actually start you filtering. And a lot of my clients, what we do is we just focus on them trying to filter more and trying to hold back information. So by filter, I mean to sort of hold back certain information, to temper their opinions a little bit and to think about, what it is they want to say and to really try to put their attention on that. I'm ADHD myself. I know this is not easy. This is a really hard thing to do, but I think the more that you enter a conversation thinking about that intention, the more you're going to hold back a bit and also feel sort of that, pride of, okay, I don't want to impact this relationship by oversharing, so I'm going to pay attention to my body signals and self-regulation and pay attention to what the other person is saying. One of the best ways also to not overshare is to engage in more active listening, and is to try to listen to what they're saying and try to actually recap what they're saying back to them and reflect it back to them, because then you're really listening, but you're also kind of giving yourself a couple beats to think about things before you talk. And by the way, even though some of us are in our houses and not able to be out in the world, you can practice this with your family. You can practice this with your phone calls that you have scheduled on your workplace. You can still do all of this, even though we're not out and about as much right now as a society. So topics that are overshared. So here's a few basic rules that I've gleaned, even just from recent, being on some different ADHD paloozas and being part of some chats and some other things. Here's some things I just wanted to share. Gory details of relationships and divorce to filter. Raw emotional material, that's the kind of thing that would be for your most intimates, your besties. Thoughts and beliefs and opinions, if you start to share them, to give a little distance and not to go rushing in with everything you believe, but to feel people out. And that can be something you practice. That can be what you're working on, is just to feel people out. The history of your life, right? Starting with age 4 and mom and dad. And then to also look at what is it that, maybe I talk too much about? What are the historic patterns that you have that, you might know if I get on the topic of politics, I talk about it too much, or I tend to overshare about money, whatever it is, to look at that and have that be part of the mission, have that be part of what you're working on. One of the things that I find with folks with ADHD and my clients is that when I talk about saying things in a more neutral way, we often feel that that's sort of inauthentic or fake. And what I would say is to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, that when we overshare or we say something in a particularly harsh way, it actually is sort of jarring for the other person. And we're giving them, all of this background that maybe they don't need to know. So I actually, in the past few weeks, as I knew I was coming to this webinar, I wrote down some of the ways that people describe things. So, where we might say something and, give the full history and really give this raw emotional information. I noticed that other people will say things like, it was a challenging situation, or she's a handful, right? They use these euphemistic ways of putting it. I know that a lot of times my clients will say, well, I really want to be authentic. But I think what happens is when we're so detailed and we don't say things in a neutral way, what ends up happening is that we end up feeling badly about that. We feel badly that we overshared. So this is a way that you can have a few of these in your pocket to describe something that maybe typically you've kind of gone too far with. And then you're able to sort of put it in a neutral way. You could literally even write these down on a sticky and stick them to your computer so that you can remember. And this is also the way that you can hear people describe that distancing. I wasn't sure about the school board vote, rather than, what we would typically say, which is to go into it more. One of the things that leads to oversharing and too many details and trips us up is sort of that level of detail that we give in information. And a lot of times people will tell me that monologuing is one of the biggest issues they feel for folks with ADHD and social. And some of you have even written it as we're going through this webinar. And one of the things that I would say to you is that something really great to practice is telling a tight story. I won't claim that I don't still work on this. It's definitely something a lot of my clients are working on. But the idea here is that instead of giving a meandering story or monologuing at the person, we would think about a story and think about what we're saying and, tell who am I telling this story to? What's their level of intimacy? What is it about the story that I want them to get? And why am I telling the story? Now, I know in the moment that can be very, very hard to do because you're worried about taking those couple of beats and responding, or you're trying to manage so many things, right? To tell this story, to talk back and forth, to pay attention. One of the things that I've sort of noticed anecdotally is that when you try to tell a tighter story and when you put your attention on that, it actually means that you do start to filter and you do start to sort of cut back on details and you do start to think about what you're saying more and be a little more intentional. I also would say that telling a tight story is something a lot of my clients work on, and they can also work on it again in the house with your phone calls, with the virtual life that we're living right now. And I think one of the benefits of the telling the tight story is that you're giving that person a more succinct version, and that's going to cut down on the way you feel after. It's going to cut down on those extra details and the oversharing. So one of the things that I talk about in Why Will No One Play With Me that you can use even as an adult, if you look in the book, I give a lot of information about practicing telling a tight story. So literally just putting your attention on this, and whenever you're telling a story, trying to think who, what, and why, and trying to, filter a little bit and think about whether or not the person needs that information. And what this means really is that as you're going about life, this would be your mission. The other thing is to maybe have a signal with your partner or your spouse where, you would try to see them, glance at you, or look at you if you're getting off track. Sometimes that can cause problems, but it also can be beneficial. One of the things that helps with a tight story is what I call an inventory of people. It's to think about the people that you're speaking to in your daily life, in your workplace, and who they are and their motives. People's motives are kind of key. It's part of who is your audience, and motives are sometimes hidden, not always obvious, and it's really about stepping into the person's shoes and noticing their past choices, the way they've been in the past, and what that tells you about them. So that when you're speaking to them, you can think about, how is this going to be received? What do I know about this person? Thinking about people who manage you or bosses, rather than things coming out of the blue or you sort of stumbling into things that might not be what you intended to share. If you sort of take the people 2 to 4 people maybe that you struggle with the most, and think about, how do they communicate? Are they succinct? Are they direct? Do they tend to talk in generalities? If you have any access to Myers-Briggs or DISC, those programs will even sometimes tell you how to leave a message, how to communicate, how to email, how to tell a story to different personality types. But the idea is, what motivates this person? Is it money? Is it praise? Is it being the only one who can come through? Is it, being the expert? And now, as you're telling them stories, as you're communicating with them, as you're thinking, especially virtually, right? We're trying to use FaceTime, to use Zoom, and read people's social cues and read their facial expressions. And then to really think about and take an inventory of the people you're communicating with, to think about, well, as I'm communicating with them, how will they receive this information? What do I know about them? Do I need to soften this? Do I need to give data? Do I need to speak in generalities? Do I need to appeal to their emotional side? All this can really help you so that you're having a better relationship and conversations and knowing what to filter and what to share. Inventory of people, just a couple more things. I often try to think what's important to the person, what's their history with you. Are there topics that are sort of, sensitive based on history? What makes them passionate? Do they have pet peeves? All of this can help you read your audience or the people you're talking to so that when you're speaking with them, instead of you kind of, stumbling into things, you're able to figure out what it is that you want to share and what it is you want to filter and who is it that I'm talking to, and step into their shoes. And maybe you even come up with a little acronym or a little, short signal to, when I'm talking to Fred, this is what I need to remember. And that will really help with, the fact that we aren't always tuned in, or sometimes self-regulation is such an issue. One of the things I wanted to share, especially given that a lot of relationships, not even just during this coronavirus crisis, but a lot of relationships nowadays are virtual, and that in in-person relationships, reading or interpreting the context, the energy, and the mood of a situation is really, really crucial and can really help you. A lot of the folks that I work with will say, well, I don't have time to read that, or it's harder for me to evaluate and I need a few beats. But here's my sort of challenge to you. If you practice this week and take 2 beats to consider the information I'm going to share about how to read context, energy, and mood, I think what you'll find is that no one is going to notice those couple of beats, and it really will help you figure out what's going on here, and then how do I adapt based on the people that I'm with, and energy and mood and context. And it helps you therefore kind of figure out where am I going and what's important. Context is, a situation, environment, the mood, the circumstances. It's what's been going on, right? And all of us have stumbled into contexts that are hard to read, but it's really about interpreting what's been going on and the context, and thinking about who you are with, where you are, and what is the situation. And therefore, what should I share or not share? What should I know? As we're working in the workplace right now, people are under tremendous pressure. So as you're speaking to someone, you're going to want to pay attention to, what's going on for them, and therefore what am I asking of them or what's happening for them. Context to pay attention to that I notice can be troublesome for us with ADHD, and we sometimes forget to pay attention to, is someone's really busy or stressed, or they seem to be, having body language that tells you that they're sensitive or they have had bad news. They maybe seem like they're deep in conversation with someone else. You've been lucky or they've been lucky and you have not. Any of those sort of contrasting things. And those are the things we can stumble on, right? We don't pay attention and we blunder in. Part of this context and reading the room and reading the mood is energy. Energy is sort of this intangible thing, but if you can learn to pay attention to people's energy, even virtually, it can really help. The idea is that, you look at their body, their voice, their words, how fast they're talking. I often have people pick out a few people in your life and notice what do they do with their body, their voice, their words when they're stressed, when they're low energy, when they're anxious, and to sort of pause and evaluate how that person is talking and what they're doing with their body and their voice. If you can pinpoint the energy, the really great thing is it's actually part of the clue to mood. Part of what I've been doing a lot is teaching people how to read the room, how to read the energy. And it's a whole process, but this is just something you can do that's quick. You get on a conference call, you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you can look at what the person does with their body and voice, how fast are they talking, what are they saying, and that'll give you a clue into their mood. So noticing someone's mood, it really can help you in terms of, where are you with them and what do you want to hold back on and what do you want to proceed with and, what stories do you want to tell and what's going on in the situation. The ability to read what's going on in the situation allows you to better prepare and have those relationships. I always suggest people pick couple people in your life and, look at what do they do in their different moods, when they're confused, when they're stressed, when they're overwhelmed. And that could be something that you're working on in terms of looking and reading the mood and taking those couple of beats and then allowing that to inform how you react to people. I wanted to say a couple words as we wrap up about communicating virtually. I think it's a little bit more challenging for us because there's a lot of self-regulation and a lot of self-management involved with having virtual relationships, but I would suggest picking a time to communicate and reach out every day. We always do better with routines. Share your thoughts and text when you have thoughts, funny things to say to friends or to say to someone so that you do communicate and keep, interfacing and being with people and connecting, which we know is really good for your health. I would say, don't let a day go by without communicating with folks outside your household and engage in self-care and monitor your mood. It might be that you need to take a media break and a social media break in order to make sure that you're not ruminating and you're not becoming too overly worried about the state of the world. I always suggest using FaceTime, Zoom, anything visual so that when you're communicating, you can read the mood of folks and you can read that body language. I think it helps everyone. Know thyself. If you tend toward opting out and you tend not to reach out, then in anything with relationships, you want to set up strategies and systems so that you do reach out because it might be your tendency. A lot of times what my clients are doing right now is setting up, body doubles, someone else who will, remind them and help them to make sure that they are reaching out and, having virtual book club, having, a virtual beer with someone so that you're not necessarily just, opting out. If you tend to overshare, then pause before you send something on social media, pause before you post. And just reread it. Take those 2 beats and then just think about who's receiving it, who's your audience, and what's their reaction going to be. If you tend to be, again, upset by the social media piece, then maybe you opt out of that and take a break, because it can really become a problem. I also think that certain habits help us all remain resilient, and thinking about how you can continue those habits. Is it a Bosy double? Is it a reminder? Is it, having someone who you do it with, so that you do continue to run or exercise or do whatever you need for self-care? The biggest thing I would say is that whenever you're communicating virtually, to think about who is your audience. How will this message be received? Do I want to use the phone? Do I want to text this? Do I want to put this in writing? Is this something I want to put out there? I know that many times when we're doing things quickly or we're experiencing self-regulation issues, we forget who is your audience. But, whenever we can think about that, it really benefits you, especially in the workplace. I have a free gift for everybody. If you go to Caroline, Coach Caroline Maguire CM, or my Facebook is Coach Caroline Maguire, you can download a free gift all about TMI, sort of going step by step in how to work on oversharing. We're going to post it here in the Resource Center and the replay for this webinar at Attitude. But I wanted to give you all something that you could take away with you. If you don't find the link, if you contact me via my website or through social media, you can definitely get the link for me and I'll send it to you. And I'll take questions now, Wayne.
Okay, plenty of them. That was excellent. Very comprehensive. Excuse me, my voice is a little bothered here. But can you give an example of how one could tell a tight story? People were looking for some more details. I hate to put you on a spot, but...
Oh, no, I definitely can tell.
How could you tell a tight story? Okay.
So I had a client who would tell a story about how to land a plane and literally give all the detail about everything you do to land a plane. And the story clocked in at like 16 minutes. And I think, when you talk about telling a tight story, you can think about a story just going back to, when you were a kid in English class, as having an arc, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so when I talk about telling a tight story, if you're talking about going to the supermarket now that there's coronavirus and the supermarkets are crazy, you wouldn't go into where you parked and, exactly which one you went to. You would try to tell it in a way of, I went, it was crazy, there was nothing on the shelves, and then, some other punch or detail that you want, rather than that sort of meandering thing that we do with ADHD. So that's what I mean by telling a tight story, is like, so that it's much more linear and much more, beginning, middle, end.
Right. Lots of questions about people who have overshared and basically damaged relationships. But they're asking, how can I repair them? You know that, as you know, a lot of ADHDers have rejection-sensitive dysphoria. They feel like they've been rejected by somebody they might have hurt, and so they don't go back and try to repair anything or apologize or just explain what they meant. So any thoughts about repairing a relationship that's been damaged by oversharing?
Absolutely. I get this question a lot. And I think one of the things you want to think about is that rather than seeing this as rejected, to see it as more that as we go through the world, there are, expected behaviors and unexpected behaviors. And when you're oversharing with someone who doesn't know you, they aren't necessarily rejecting you. They're not maybe going forward in the relationship with you, because you did something that was, not what they expected, and so they're not pursuing it. And I think if you think about everybody as sort of having a brand, you can repair that relationship, especially if you think about putting your best foot forward, so that when you interact with them from now on, even if you bump into them in a chance encounter, trying to, just demonstrate your best self. The more I think that you go into what you meant and why you said, I think the more that it becomes strange to them. My experience with my clients has been that when they work on these things and then demonstrate to others that this is something that is better, people are receptive to continuing that relationship. I also think that what we tend to do is to really take it so personally, or to worry so much and ruminate about that one person. But rather, perhaps it's trying to, curb the oversharing in general. And, if the relationship was a deep relationship, then you can repair it. If it was just a superficial encounter, or it was, another parent at something, or someone at work, the more you improve this and help your brand, the more it won't happen anymore for future relationships. But I think the rejection dysphoria tends to be this sensitivity where people feel that they feel it and think about it so much. I would more think about the future rather than focusing on those past missteps.
That's good advice. Several people have said, they're so fearful of oversharing that they become self-conscious to the point where they come across as emotionally aloof or cold in relationships. So they're looking for a balance. I'm not sure what you might have to suggest there.
I see that a lot. I see it in kids, I see it in teens, and I see it in adults. And I think I totally get why people feel self-conscious and tend to withdraw. I think practice is the answer. The more you practice having conversations, especially about topics where you tend to overshare, and you get better at it, the less you have to be afraid that it's going to happen, and therefore you don't have to worry about that, seeming emotionally distant, or what some of my clients do, which is not to talk at all because they're so worried about what they'll say. If you practice, even with your own family, pretending or having certain people that you pick out where you're like, I am going to have a conversation with them, and I'm going to, work on not oversharing, then you get to be authentic and you get to have that connection to people, and the fear dissipates. I also think, we worry so much about the opinion of others that we think we appear emotionally distant. It may be happening, but it also may be something that you're worrying about and that other people aren't worrying about. But practice, because then you get confident.
Very good. I mean, some people have asked about how do they make small talk to sort of break into a conversation. Like they make I'll leave it to you.
Oh, absolutely. So I know Why Will No One Play With Me is a book written for, young people and teens, but I can't stress enough that I use the exercises with adults. So if you want to, get this book and practice this way, anyone who's listening, it really can help. I do something where I literally practice with people, building on a conversation and making small talk on different topics. And you could practice this with a friend, you can practice this with your partner, you can practice this in your workplace, where you think about a conversation. A conversation is, if you think about Jenga, right? You're putting blocks on top of the other blocks of the conversation, and you're making small talk on that topic, not other topics, not side topics, not deep topics. And so one of the things that gets in our way is that we either jump to really intimate conversations, or we find it boring, so it's hard to keep our attention. So again, this is something where I think practice, going places and practicing making this small talk and figuring out how do you, keep your attention. That reflection that I mentioned before, where you recap what the other person said, that is a great way to keep your attention, because you basically have to listen to the person to sort of reflect what they said. But there's many exercises, and I even have some on my website to practice this, because it is something, I almost included it in full in the webinar, because it really is something that gets in our way.
Well, I guess that might be the answer to the next question. This woman is saying, I often lose track of what someone is saying when their stories are long and involve a lot of details. How can I focus and truly listen to the content? Sometimes I make believe that I heard what they said when I really didn't.
I think we all do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think if you reflect back and you recap and you try to add thoughts, then you become more active. I also have had adults tell me that they will literally play a game where they try to, literally hear the last thing the person said so that they can, note it, and they just gamify it a little bit. But it is something that gets in our way, and it is hard. And that's one reason it's such a topic of conversation.
Okay, one big topic. The phone. People talking on phones, ADHD and your smartphone. One woman is saying, will you discuss the fear of even picking up the phone to call people and fear of speaking in case I say something damaging or stupid or not funny? So a lot of people, I've heard this before, a lot of people just avoid phone calls because of that.
I absolutely am familiar with this. And first, I'd like to say that I think the fear is probably worse than what could happen. And first off, you don't have to use phone as your only medium, right? There's so many other mediums nowadays, and if they work better, use those. But I'm guessing this person asked, and this is a topic because people need to use the phone. What I would say is, if you work on the issue of oversharing, if you have some reminders in place around you, it could be just one symbol. I used to have a client who would put a domino on his desk because it represented the domino effect that happened when he forgot certain things. You can have a symbol to remind you of what your intention is. If you keep your phone calls a little shorter, that can help. But also, a lot of what I'm hearing is this rumination and really feeling anxiety about things. And I think that's where a lot of the, is there evidence for this? Is there evidence that it's going to be a disaster? And is there evidence that, you are citing, or are you sort of, building this up in your head? And I think usually the answer is that we're building it up. And I think the more you practice it, the more you're going to feel good about it and confident and have the perspective of, yeah, one conversation didn't go well, but the other 9 did. So let's focus on those 9.
Several questions about forgetting names. I forget names of people I see regularly. It is embarrassing for me and offensive to some, as it seems dismissive to them that I can't even remember their name. Any practical suggestions for remembering names?
Yes. So first of all, this happens to me too. I fully will confess. A few practical little things I do with my clients. We write people's names and who they are in a note section of their iPhone, so that if you run into someone, you can quickly look up who they are, or if there's somebody, in your workplace, you enter a meeting and you're like, oh gosh, what is that guy's name? You can look it up. The other thing is to invent little rhymes for yourself, and to have those be fun, because we're creative, and to think about that. The other thing is, I feel like other people forget names too. They're just not as hard on themselves as we are. So, it can be that you can say, I'm so sorry, I just can't remember, early on, so that it doesn't become a thing. But one of the other tips is also to re-say their name. So when I meet you, to say, oh, Wayne, is it? And to come up with some kind of little, phrase that reminds you of them. It is a problem, but I also think other people forget names, and they're not as hard on themselves as we are about it.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I agree with that. Where does ADHD medication fit into all of this? Does it help on some level?
I think ADHD medication for social does exactly what it does in all aspects of life. ADHD medication allows you to focus more, it allows you to be more aware, it allows you to be more present. So I'm obviously a coach and not a doctor, so I can't comment on, what medication, but I would say that, the more focused you are and the more able to be present you are, the better you're going to be with social. It also helps tremendously with self-regulation. I also have clients who, add to that by running, by exercising, by doing other things to really help their focus, especially before any kind of big social event where they really have to be on, but it's really hard for them.
Right. Several people have asked about how do I pull back on monopolizing the conversation before it gets too far. Where to stop and move back or pause. I know you might have suggested this, but talk about over-talking in a conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Over-talking, monologuing, it is a challenge for us. It all goes back to self-regulation. So one of the reasons I included the slides about thinking about your triggers, thinking about your emotional state and your self-regulation state, which can be also that you're really happy that day and really on that day and really activated, is because one of the things that helps with monologuing and over-talking is to be more self-regulated and more centered. The other thing is to really think of a conversation as like ping pong, where it should be you talking and then them talking. And one of the reasons I included telling a tight story is that people who tend to overtalk or monologue, they tend not to tell tight stories. And so therefore the conversation isn't back and forth or reciprocal. So that again goes back to practice. If you tend to monologue, which a lot of us do, my suggestion is that you practice having conversations where you try to talk less and you try to make sure that you're adding a thought to the conversation, not dominating the conversation. And your comments shouldn't last more than 15, 20 seconds. So if you practice that, then you're going to become more aware that it's really a back and forth. And again, it goes back to self-regulation. What's your state? And are there topics too where you tend to monologue, like politics or, a particular person?
Mm-hmm. One last quick question, as the hour is almost up, but people want to know how to follow up with friends. A lot of people have let relationships lag and, then they get suddenly back in touch, or they feel bad and don't get back in touch, or they do get back in touch and the other person is sort of cold to them because they haven't been in touch about the details of their lives. Is there anything, can you put that in a planner? Can you, I mean, just a quick text of hope you're doing well in coronavirus time, something like that, which shows that they're present.
Right. I would say to plan is a great way, and to have some rituals, send Christmas cards, send a Christmas email or a holiday email, have some rituals that you follow that kind of force you to make sure that you check in with people, especially people you're not seeing in daily life. I think the other thing is we do have an opportunity to just reach out right now and see how people are. Send a quick text. When it's on your mind, send the text. Because, for us, it goes out of our mind. The other thing is, put it in a planner. Make sure that you have some kind of tickler system. It sounds a little silly, but it really helps. I also think for every person who's a little distant and a little cold, people do understand that people are busy. And you can even say, I'm terrible at keeping in touch, but it really wants you to know you are always on my mind. And that is something that people respond really well to. Again, I think our fear and our rumination gets in the way, and we decide not to reach out, anticipating the reaction that is really more about our worry than about how the person will probably react.
Well, that was great advice. Yes, I agree with all of that. Very good. I think the hour is up. You really gave us great insights and strategies, Caroline. I appreciate it. I'm sure
Thank
the community
you.
does. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise, and have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. And thanks for everyone attending the webinar today. There'll actually be another webinar tomorrow, which will be part 2 of marijuana and the ADHD brain. Roberto Olivardia will answer more of your most pressing questions that he didn't get to in the first webinar. So hope to see you tomorrow, and have a great day, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.